Well, I've been to bed, but...
To sleep is what I meant.
A number of people.
Can I ask you some serious questions?
Sure, you can go right in.
right.
I feel perfectly
Have you been
fine.
drinking?
Everyone thinks they know Johnny Carson, the calm smile, the effortless jokes, the man who never lost control of his stage. But what if I told you some of the most famous guests in television history walked onto that stage already drunk,
How'd all these people get in your room?
and the audience had no idea how close the show came to falling apart? These weren't small slip-ups. These were legends slurring their words, forgetting who they were, insulting other guests, and forcing Johnny to quietly save live television in real time. Some moments were funny, some were uncomfortable, and a few were so bad, those guests were never invited back. Stay with this video, because by the end, you'll see Johnny Carson and live television very differently than you ever have before. Dean Martin.
How you been, Joey?
Hello. Good to see you.
How'd all these people get in your room?
You're gonna start already, huh?
No,
How
I'm
are
not
you?
starting.
How are you?
I'm almost through.
Dean Martin walked onto The Tonight Show many times already holding a drink, and for years, people believed it was all part of the act. He had built his career on effortless cool, the relaxed crooner, the man who seemed like he could charm a room without trying. On his own variety show, the loose, boozy persona worked beautifully. The audience expected it, they loved it, but Johnny Carson's desk was different. Once Dean sat down, something shifted. The timing felt off. Jokes landed late or not at all. Punchlines slurred together. Sometimes Dean greeted Johnny like they had never met before, even though they had shared that stage countless times. At first, the audience laughed out of habit. Then the laughter thinned. You could hear it. That subtle moment when people stop laughing because they're no longer sure they're supposed to. Johnny tried to help. He fed Dean easy setups, familiar questions, safe territory, questions Dean could have answered in his sleep. Instead, Dean interrupted him mid-sentence, wandered into half-told stories, then abandoned them completely. He stood up unexpectedly and drifted toward the band as if he'd forgotten the cameras were still on him. Movie titles got mixed up. Projects he was supposed to promote vanished from memory. There were moments when Dean simply stopped talking, staring off into nothing, as if the thought he'd been chasing had disappeared right in front of everyone. Behind the scenes, producers quietly adjusted the schedule whenever Dean Martin was booked. They knew his segments could stretch unpredictably or collapse without warning. Emergency commercial breaks became a real possibility. The legend was still there in flashes, but every appearance felt like a gamble. Would the audience get the Dean Martin they loved? Or would they watch a man struggling to hold on to the version of himself the public expected? Johnny never embarrassed him. He never called it out directly. He just kept smiling and steering and surviving until the band played them out. Then came a moment no one saw coming. Ed McMahon. Ed McMahon was supposed to be the safety net, the dependable constant, Johnny's right-hand man who never stumbled, never forgot a beat, never lost control. Which is why the night he did was so shocking. It started small. A simple introduction, Joan Embry from the San Diego Zoo. Ed fixated on how many years she had been appearing on the show. 7? 8? 9? He couldn't let it go. He argued with Johnny, insisted he was right even when the numbers made no sense.
About 9 years.
Right, yeah. Several plus several will be about 9.
You said 7 or 8.
No, I said
It's been-
no, I didn't say 7 or 8. I said several.
Then you said 7 or 8, and I said
Did
it's
I?
9. yes.
9. Good, thank you.
Some of the animals you had as babies are now 10 years old.
That would be about right.
His speech softened. His rhythm vanished. Johnny tried to gently redirect. Ed pushed back, then drifted. Slurred anecdotes followed, stories about baby animals that wandered nowhere. He interrupted Joan's introduction repeatedly, derailing the entire segment before it could even begin. At one point, he grew oddly sentimental, then defensive, then confused about what he had just said moments earlier. The audience didn't know how to react. This wasn't part of the act. This wasn't comedy. Johnny tried humor as a lifeline, joking about Ed needing a nap, trying to pull him back into familiar territory. Nothing worked. Finally, Johnny did the only thing he could. He rushed the introduction, brought Joan out quickly, and moved on. The moment passed, but it lingered. It was one of the rare nights when Ed McMahon, the most polished man on television, appeared visibly intoxicated, forcing Johnny into quiet damage control. And if that moment felt uncomfortable, what came next crossed into something darker. Truman Capote. When Truman Capote walked out in 1980, the room went quiet before he ever spoke. He shuffled instead of walked. His feet barely cleared the floor.
Well, I've been to bed, but...
To sleep is what I meant.
A number of people.
Can I ask you some serious questions?
Sure, you can go right in.
All right.
I feel perfectly
Have you been
fine.
drinking?
You mean very lately?
You have had a history of alcoholism. Millions of people out there have
My
also had
God,
the same problem.
alcohol isn't the least of it.
He leaned on Johnny's desk to steady himself before collapsing into the guest chair. His eyes were glassy, his movements slow and uncoordinated. Johnny greeted him with cautious optimism, hoping, against all evidence, that the situation might improve once they started talking. It didn't. Capote's words slurred together into something almost unrecognizable. Sentences began and ended nowhere. The audience sat frozen, watching one of America's most celebrated writers struggle to form a thought. Johnny asked about his writing. Capote launched into a rambling story about a party, then a dog, then people no one could follow. Each sentence collapsed before it finished. Then came the moment that sucked the air out of the room. Capote turned to Ed McMahon and asked, completely serious, if he could sit in his lap. Ed laughed nervously, unsure how else to respond. Johnny tried redirecting again. Capote reached for a glass of water, missed his mouth entirely, spilled it down his shirt, and didn't even notice. This wasn't funny. This wasn't entertaining. It was frightening. After several agonizing minutes, Johnny called for an early commercial break. When the show returned, the segment lasted only moments before ending completely. Truman Capote was never invited back. The clip became infamous, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author unraveling on live television with nowhere to hide, and the night was far from over. Shelley Winters. Shelley Winters didn't unravel quietly. She exploded. From the second she walked out, she dominated the stage. She talked over Johnny constantly, ignored his questions, and steamrolled the other guests. That night, 2 other people sat on the couch, but Shelley made it impossible for them to exist. A young actor was there to promote the biggest film of his career. Shelley turned to him, grabbed his knee, and openly mocked his movie on national television, called it boring, insulted his performance. The actor froze, smiling in horror while millions watched. Johnny tried stepping in. Shelley ignored him. Then she noticed the note cards in Johnny's hand, the questions written by the writers. Without hesitation, she reached across the desk, snatched the entire stack, and threw them behind her over the couch. The cards scattered across the floor. The audience gasped. Johnny sat stunned. No guest had ever done that before. Shelley kept talking as if nothing had happened. Johnny stared at the camera, made a decision, and cut to commercial early. And that was only the beginning. When the cameras came back up after Shelley Winters was finally ushered off stage, the studio felt different. Crew members moved more quietly. The audience clapped, but it was hesitant, uncertain. Johnny Carson smiled, delivered the next transition, and kept the show moving like he always did. But moments like that left scars, not on the audience, on the people responsible for keeping chaos from swallowing live television whole. And as the years went on, the chaos didn't slow down, it evolved. Sometimes it arrived wrapped in brilliance. Orson Welles. By the time Orson Welles walked onto The Tonight Show set in 1975, most of the staff already knew what kind of night they were in for. He had been drinking heavily all day. Crew members saw wine bottles in his dressing room. They watched him refill glasses without hesitation. But Orson Welles was not like other guests. Even intoxicated, he commanded attention in a way few humans ever could. When he sat down, Johnny asked a single question. Orson never stopped talking. 14 minutes passed without a pause, not a breath long enough for Johnny to jump in. Orson drifted from Shakespeare to theater history, from his early film career to obscure European directors no one in the audience had ever heard of. He quoted lines from plays, then forgot the actual words and made up new ones entirely, delivering them with complete authority. No one dared interrupt him. Johnny tried. He leaned forward. He opened his mouth. Orson rolled right over him. The audience was mesmerized. They weren't laughing much, but they weren't bored either. Even drunk, Orson Welles was fascinating. Johnny glanced at the camera once, eyes wide, communicating everything without saying a word. He had completely lost control of the segment. And yet, when it finally ended, Johnny invited Orson back again in the future. Because when Orson was good, he was transcendent. When he was drunk, he was still compelling. You just never knew which version would walk through that curtain. Johnny accepted that risk with some guests. With others, he refused to take it at all. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed never made it onto Johnny Carson's stage. And that wasn't an accident. Reed was scheduled for an appearance in the early 1970s, riding the momentum of a rising Hollywood career. On paper, he was perfect, charismatic, wild, unpredictable in a way that could make great television. But NBC executives had seen the tapes from other talk shows. They watched Reed insult hosts, threaten to expose himself on air, demand alcohol during interviews, and nearly turn violent. They brought the footage to Johnny. Johnny watched quietly. He didn't laugh. He didn't comment much. When the tapes ended, he made a simple decision. The booking was canceled. No explanation, no rescheduling. Oliver Reed mocked Johnny publicly afterward, calling him afraid, uptight, weak. Johnny didn't respond. He had spent enough years navigating live disasters to know the difference between entertaining chaos and dangerous unpredictability. Oliver Reed crossed that line before he ever reached the stage. Some guests, though, lived right on that edge. Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole could be brilliant or disastrous depending on the hour and how much he'd had to drink. His 1978 appearance delivered both versions in rapid succession. He arrived after a heavy afternoon of drinking. You could smell it when he sat down. Johnny asked about Lawrence of Arabia. O'Toole ignored the question completely and launched into a lecture about acting technique that was genuinely insightful. The audience leaned in. This was why he was a legend. Then the lecture dissolved into rambling confusion. Then it snapped back to brilliance again. He grabbed Johnny's pen, turned it into a fencing foil, and pulled Johnny into an impromptu duel right there on the show. Johnny laughed, played along, but you could see him calculating, how long could this go on before it became unmanageable? Then O'Toole launched into wild drinking stories about Richard Harris. Stories that probably should never have been told on television. The audience roared. Johnny let it ride. Somehow it worked. Peter O'Toole walked the tightrope better than most. Even drunk, he remained magnetic. Johnny kept inviting him back because chaos, in this case, came paired with genius. But not everyone knew when to stop. Foster Brooks. Foster Brooks built an entire career playing a drunk, slurred speech, staggering movements, forgotten names. The audience loved him for it. They understood it was an act, most of the time. On at least one appearance, Brooks drank before going on, staged to warm up. He had done it before. Usually it helped him slip into character. This time, it went too far. Mid-bit, something changed. The slurring became uneven. The timing fell apart. He lost track of his routine entirely. The difference between performance and reality became visible. Johnny noticed instantly. Without missing a beat, Johnny adjusted. He turned the moment into comedy, leaned into the confusion, played along as if it were all intentional. The audience laughed, unaware of the quiet rescue happening in real time. Afterward, crew members talked about it openly. Foster Brooks hadn't just been playing drunk. He had been drunk, and Johnny had saved him from embarrassment without ever calling it out. That was Johnny Carson's real talent. Not avoiding chaos, but absorbing it. Then came someone who refused to be absorbed. Robert Blake. Robert Blake arrived that night with an edge that everyone backstage felt immediately. He had been drinking, not enough to stumble, but enough to sharpen his mood into something volatile. When he walked out, the audience applauded like they always did, expecting the familiar tough guy charm. But the moment he sat down, the energy shifted. His leg bounced, his fingers tapped. His eyes scanned the room like he was daring someone to challenge him. Johnny asked a standard opening question about Blake's latest project. Blake didn't answer it. Instead, he launched into a rant about Hollywood phoniness. He attacked the industry while sitting on its biggest stage. Johnny tried redirecting him toward the film he was supposed to promote. Blake swatted the attempt away and kept going. His energy was erratic. One moment intense, the next emotional, then angry again. He stood up unprompted and began demonstrating a story about a director he once worked with. The camera scrambled to keep him in frame. Johnny gently motioned for him to sit back down. Blake leaned over Johnny's desk instead and launched into another monologue, this time about the pressure of being in the business for decades. The audience laughed nervously at moments that weren't jokes. Johnny raised his eyebrows toward Ed McMahon. Ed nodded slightly. They both knew the segment was slipping away. Johnny tried soft questions, harmless ones, anything to reset the tone. Blake ignored every single one. The band began playing to signal the end of the segment. Blake kept talking. Finally, Johnny stood up, placed a hand on Blake's shoulder, and thanked him. The gesture was polite, but firm. The message was clear. We're done. Blake lingered even as the cameras cut away. Backstage, the mood was tense. Producers replayed the segment silently, watching body language instead of listening to words. Carson leaning back. Ed staring forward. The audience uncertain whether to applaud. Johnny didn't raise his voice. He didn't rant. He simply said it out loud. If he's been drinking, we don't book him. That decision became policy. And by the time the show wrapped that night, everyone understood why. By the time the lights dimmed and the band played its final notes, the audience at home rarely understood how close the show had come to slipping off the rails. They saw a smooth transition, a polite goodbye, a calm host in a suit who never seemed rattled. What they didn't see was the silent math happening in Johnny Carson's head every time a guest showed signs of losing control. How much time do we have left? Can I redirect this without embarrassing them? Do I cut early or can I ride it out? Live television offered no pause button. Every second stretched longer when something went wrong. In over 30 years, Johnny learned that alcohol didn't just loosen tongues, it exposed truth. Not always the truth people wanted seen. Some guests walked away from those moments laughing, their reputations untouched. Others never recovered. Behind the scenes, a quiet system developed. Producers began noting patterns. Who arrived already drinking? Who needed to be monitored? Who could be trusted? Who couldn't? Johnny never made a spectacle of these decisions. He didn't shame guests. He simply adjusted. A shorter segment here, a padded commercial break there, or, in rare cases, a name quietly moved to the never again list. What made these moments unforgettable wasn't just the behavior. It was the contrast. America trusted Johnny Carson. He represented stability, a nightly ritual, the sense that no matter what chaos existed outside, The Tonight Show would remain safe, controlled, familiar. Watching that control tested, sometimes pushed to the brink, made those episodes impossible to forget. There were nights when the chaos was almost charming, when drunken brilliance somehow elevated the moment instead of destroying it. Orson Welles rambling through Shakespeare while making up his own lines. Peter O'Toole fencing with a pen while delivering insights no acting class ever could. Those moments became legends because they flirted with disaster without crossing into something darker. But there were other nights. Nights when laughter died mid-sentence. When the audience stopped clapping because they didn't know if they should. When a celebrated writer slurred words so badly it felt intrusive to watch. When a respected actor turned hostile, unpredictable, impossible to redirect. Those moments stayed with people for a different reason. They felt real, and Johnny Carson absorbed all of it. He never scolded on air. He never humiliated guests, even when they humiliated themselves. His control wasn't about domination, it was about containment. Keeping the show intact long enough to reach the next commercial. Long enough to protect the audience from seeing how close the line really was. The truth is, Johnny Carson didn't just host celebrities. He managed volatility. He navigated egos, addictions, insecurity, and public collapse in real time, and he did it with a smile that rarely cracked, even when the room was holding its breath. That's why these moments still matter. They weren't rehearsed scandals. They weren't carefully edited documentaries. They were raw, unfiltered snapshots of fame when the mask slipped. When legendary figures became fragile humans under bright studio lights. When the illusion of control disappeared and all that remained was survival. In the end, every one of these appearances told the same story in different ways. No matter how famous you are, no matter how beloved, live television doesn't protect you, it reveals you. And Johnny Carson, more than any host before or after him, understood that survival wasn't about avoiding chaos. It was about guiding the audience through it without letting the whole thing collapse. Sometimes that meant laughing it off. Sometimes it meant cutting to commercial, and sometimes it meant quietly making sure it never happened again. Because once someone walks through that curtain drunk, there's no script to follow, no safety net, just minutes to manage whatever unfolds next. And Johnny Carson did that better than anyone. Which of these moments surprised you the most? Are there other Tonight Show appearances you think crossed the line? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more untold stories from television's most unpredictable era, stay connected for what comes next.